The man in the back of the line. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in a small town nestled between misty hills and the open stretch of highway that most drivers passed without a second thought. The kind of town where everybody knew each other's dog's name, but sometimes forgot the birthdays of people they saw every day. It was early spring and a soft drizzle clung to the windows of the local cafe, giving the streets a blurry, watercolor look. Inside that warm little place with the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon in the air, a young woman named Lily stood near the counter, trying to count the change in her hand. Lily wasn't rich. In fact, she had just gotten off the night shift from the nursing home across town. Her shoes were worn, her eyes had dark circles from sleep deprivation, and her back ached from helping an elderly patient who had fallen out of bed at 2 a.m. But Lily had something that couldn't be seen. Something rare. She had kindness, not the flashy Instagram kind, but the quiet, daily sort of kindness that lived in small choices. Staying late to comfort a lonely resident, remembering how someone takes their coffee, or smiling at a stranger who looked like they hadn't smiled in days. She was in line at Jenna's Brew and Bean, the town's only coffee shop. People chatted quietly, scrolling on their phones or tapping impatiently as the baristas worked behind the counter. The place was slow today, machines making soft hissing sounds, pastry wrappers rustling. Lily was about to place her order when she felt the presence of someone behind her, not just close, but watching in a way that made her spine tingle. Not with fear, but curiosity. The man behind her wore a faded hoodie, dark jeans and sunglasses despite the cloudy day. His beard was a little scruffy, and there was something in his posture that suggested he didn't want attention. Yet, he stood, still, like he was observing everything around him. When she glanced back for just a moment, their eyes met. His eyes were kind, but tired. Like someone who'd walked through many storms and still carried the rain. Without really thinking about it, Lily asked the barista, "Can I pay for the guy behind me too?" The words came out softer than usual, almost like a whisper carried by instinct. The barista looked at her with a surprised smile. "Sure. You want to cover his coffee?" Lily nodded. "Yeah, I've had those mornings where $5 feels like a mountain. Maybe he's having one of those." The man behind her didn't speak. Not right away. He simply gave a small, almost invisible smile, like he was used to hiding gratitude behind silence. He stepped forward only after Lily paid, and when the barista asked for his order, he replied in a voice that was deep but gentle, "Same as hers." Lily turned back to look at him, and for a moment, the world quieted. It was like standing in the eye of a storm. Something about him felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. She shook the feeling off and moved to the side to wait for her drink. As the minutes passed, they both stood near the pickup counter. Silence wrapped around them, but it wasn't awkward. It was warm, comfortable, the kind of quiet where you feel understood without having to speak. Then, just as Lily reached for her drink, he spoke again. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do that." She looked at him and smiled. "You looked like you needed it." He hesitated. "What made you think that?" "I don't know," she replied. "Just a feeling." He nodded slowly, then added, "Not many people would do something like that." "I don't think that's true," she said. "I think people are kind more often than we notice. We just don't always see it." That answer seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at her, studied her like she was an unsolved mystery, then smiled again. This time it reached his eyes. "You might be right," he said, and then he walked out the door. Lily stood still, drink in hand, unsure why her heart was racing. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, like she had just bumped into fate disguised in a stranger's hoodie. But what she didn't know, what no one in that cafe knew, was that the man she had just bought coffee for was not just a stranger. It was Keanu Reeves. And that day he wasn't just grabbing a coffee. He was testing something. He had quietly been traveling from town to town, dressed in clothes that would never attract attention, without an assistant or a camera crew, without his usual security. No press, no social media, no fanfare. He was looking for real kindness, Keanu had always believed that fame could be a wall between hearts. He had seen people act differently around him his whole life. Some kinder, some colder, others dishonest. It was something he had learned to live with. But recently, it had started to bother him deeply. He had started to wonder, was kindness still real? Were people kind when they thought no one was watching? And so he had started what he called his quiet kindness journey. No cameras, no makeovers, no headlines, just himself. Alone, unrecognizable. But what Lily didn't know was that her simple act, one coffee, $5, a gentle gesture, would soon become the spark of something much greater. And it would change both of their lives. Names. We never say out loud. The sky that afternoon had turned a dull gray, not quite stormy, but not soft either. It was the kind of color that made you pause and take a breath without knowing why. Lily stood outside the coffee shop, her paper cup warming her cold fingers, watching strangers hurry past with umbrellas and headphones and worries etched into their brows. The man she had just bought coffee for had already disappeared into the street like a note carried away by the wind. She told herself it didn't matter. It was just a cup of coffee. Just a moment. But somewhere deep inside her, something shifted. She walked home through narrow sidewalks lined with puddles and crooked fences. Her apartment building was old, the kind that creaked and sighed when the wind pushed against it, but it had character. Each door told a story. Each neighbor, a mystery. And Lily, with her quiet life and even quieter heart, lived on the second floor tucked away behind a door painted blue by a tenant long gone. Once inside, she slipped off her shoes, fed her cat, and dropped her bag by the door with a soft sigh. But she didn't feel tired the way she usually did after a night shift. Something inside her buzzed. Not anxiety, not excitement, just a feeling that today had meant more than it seemed. She didn't know that just a few blocks away, in a rundown motel that didn't even have a sign. The man she had helped was sitting on the edge of a bed with his hands clasped tightly, thinking about her too. Keanu had once lived a life full of red carpets, flashing cameras, and people constantly telling him who he was supposed to be, but that world, while bright, had grown hollow over the years. He had experienced loss in ways he rarely spoke about. It wasn't just grief. It was the kind that wraps around your bones and changes the way you move through the world. Friends, gone too soon. Family pulled away by fate's cold hand. Love that never had a chance to stay. And so a few months ago, he had made a decision most would never understand. He vanished. Not in a dramatic way. There were no headlines, no official goodbye. He simply stopped being seen. No press, no handlers, no entourage. He let his beard grow, wore clothes that blended in, changed cities like shoes, and most importantly, he stopped speaking his name unless asked. It wasn't a game, it was a search. He wanted to see if kindness still existed when no one thought it mattered, if people could still be good without a reason, without recognition, without return. And Lily had done just that. No hesitation, no questions, just kindness, quiet and real. Back in her apartment, Lily sat on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest, replaying their exchange in her mind. Something about the man's eyes still haunted her, the way they held stories behind silence, the way they seemed both grateful and burdened at once. And then there was the moment he said, "Same." As hers, it wasn't just about the coffee. It felt like a thread connecting two strangers across a moment neither expected. The next morning, after a dreamless sleep, she walked into her shift at the nursing home where she worked. The halls smelled like antiseptic and lemon cleaner. The familiar shuffle of walkers and distant calls for help echoed as usual. But today, everything felt a little softer. She moved with a little more patience, smiled a little longer, listened a little closer. She helped Mr. Davis fix his hearing aid, brought Mrs. Lopez an extra blanket, told Mrs. Turner that her granddaughter's drawing looked like a masterpiece, and in every act, she felt a strange warmth, like the universe had tilted slightly and let in more light. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in the back corner of a quiet diner on the edge of town, scribbling notes in his leather-bound journal. He wrote not in full sentences but in fragments, feelings, thoughts, questions. He wrote about Lily, not by name, but by the way she made him feel. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't look through me. She saw someone she didn't owe anything to, and still gave. He closed the journal and looked out the window, the rain beginning to fall again. He didn't know why this moment, this girl had shaken him so deeply. Maybe because her kindness had arrived without expectation. Maybe because she didn't know who he was and loved something in him anyway. Or maybe for the first time in a long while he felt seen. That night, Lily walked into the bookstore she loved, the one with the creaky floorboards and handwritten staff picks. She didn't know why she went there. Maybe it was routine, maybe it was instinct. But as she walked through the poetry section, her eyes scanned the shelf without focus until something made her stop. It wasn't a book. It was him, sitting in the far corner again alone, reading quietly. And once again something inside her whispered, "Go sit." But this time, she didn't hesitate. Whispers in the rain. The rain hadn't stopped since the morning. It came down in soft waves now, tapping gently against Lily's windshield as she sat motionless in her old Toyota Corolla, parked on a quiet side street. The engine was off, her hands resting on the steering wheel, and her thoughts drifting back to that moment in the coffee shop, the stranger with the kind eyes and the quiet presence. She didn't know why she couldn't let it go. It wasn't love at first sight or anything silly like that. It was something deeper, something rare, like she had glimpsed a secret the world wasn't supposed to see. Hours had passed since then. After the coffee, she had gone home, fed her cat, changed out of her scrubs, and tried to nap. But sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Not because it was handsome, though it was, but because there was something hidden behind his gaze, something heavy, something aching. Eventually, unable to rest, she decided to take a walk through the old part of town. There was a bookstore there she liked, Wild Words, run by a retired literature professor and his wife. The place always smelled like ink, dust, and fresh muffins. She wasn't going for the books, though. She just needed to clear her mind, and maybe, just maybe, run into him again. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu sat alone in a small motel room that looked like it hadn't been redecorated since the 80s. The wallpaper peeled in the corners. The carpet was a faded green. There was a tiny TV bolted to the dresser and a kettle that took 10 minutes just to get warm. But he didn't mind. He wasn't there for luxury. He was there for truth. He held a small leather notebook in his hands, his travel journal. Every day he wrote in it, not about fame or work or scripts. He wrote about the people he met, the strangers, the silent stories that existed all around him. And today, he was writing about her. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't expect anything in return. She just gave. He stopped writing, looked out the window. The rain traced slow rivers down the glass. I wonder what made her like that. Keanu wasn't just testing kindness. He was trying to understand it, trying to find proof that the world hadn't hardened completely. After all the pain he'd seen, all the fake smiles and cruel headlines, all the personal loss he had suffered behind closed doors, he needed to believe that goodness still existed quietly, somewhere, without applause. And Lily had reminded him of that. But what he didn't know was that Lily's kindness didn't come from having a perfect life. It came from surviving an imperfect one. She had grown up in foster care after her parents passed away in a car accident when she was 9. She had bounced between homes until she aged out of the system. For years, she felt invisible, discarded, like she didn't belong anywhere. But somehow she never let it turn her bitter. Instead, it made her notice the invisible people around her, the janitors, the exhausted moms, the lonely seniors, the strangers behind in line. Because she had been all of them at some point. As she stepped into the bookstore, a small bell above the door jingled. The warmth and scent of old paper wrapped around her like a blanket. She smiled at Mrs. Merrick behind the counter. exchanged a few kind words, then wandered into the back section where poetry lived in crooked stacks. She wasn't looking for anything, and that's when she saw him. Keanu, sitting on a wooden bench by the rain-splattered window, a book open in his hands, her breath caught in her throat. Not because of recognition, but because it felt like bumping into a ghost you weren't sure was real. He was still dressed simply, same hoodie, same quiet posture, but this time, he looked up before she had to say anything. Their eyes met again, and this time, neither of them looked away. "You," she said softly, as if afraid to break the moment. He closed the book gently. "Me." "You're reading poetry?" she asked with a teasing smile. He shrugged. "Trying to find words for something I can't quite explain." She sat beside him without asking, and neither of them said anything for a while. They just listened to the rain. Eventually, he turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you pay for my coffee?" She blinked. "I don't know." You looked like someone who needed a reason to believe in people again. His expression shifted. A crack appeared in the mask he wore. "Do you believe in people?" he asked. She took a breath. "I want to." He nodded slowly. "Me too." Outside, the rain softened. Inside, something in both of them shifted, and then, without meaning to, she laughed. "You know, you're kind of strange. You act like someone who's been searching for something his whole life." Keanu smiled, but his eyes were far away. "Maybe I have." "Well," she said, standing, "whatever it is, I hope you find it." As she walked away, he called out softly, "Maybe I already did." But she didn't hear him. Not yet. He sat alone for a long time after that, thinking about how a stranger's simple kindness had become a thread pulling at the seams of his quiet loneliness, and tomorrow he would test the world again. But this time he wouldn't be able to stop thinking about her. The story behind the smile: the rain had stopped by morning, but the clouds hung low like heavy secrets in the sky. The streets were still wet, dotted with puddles that mirrored the broken rhythm of passing feet. Lily sat in her small apartment on the second floor of a brick building that smelled like old paint and forgotten memories. Her cat, Whiskers, lay, curled beside her on the couch, purring gently. But Lily wasn't paying attention. Her fingers were curled around a chipped mug of tea, but it had gone cold. Her mind was somewhere else, still circling the stranger from the bookstore, the man with the careful voice and quiet eyes, the man who felt more familiar than 1,000 faces she saw every day. Something about him tugged at her, not just curiosity, not just attraction. It was as if she had heard a part of her own story echoed in the silence between his words. It was rare to meet someone who made you feel less alone just by existing in the same space. Rarer still when that someone was a complete stranger. But Lily had always been drawn to quiet sadness, perhaps because she had lived inside it for most of her life. Years ago, before she was a nurse, before she had anything to call her own, Lily had been homeless for a short time, just a few months after leaving foster care. She never told anyone about it, not because she was ashamed, but because she had promised herself that her past wouldn't define her. She had slept in bus stations, eaten from soup kitchens, and walked for miles just to find shelter. And during that time, no one ever paid for her coffee. No one even noticed she existed. So when she saw a man who looked invisible, she refused to let him stay that way. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu stood on the edge of a hill that overlooked the valley. He had hiked there alone, escaping the motel, the noise of the world, the distractions of everything except truth. The wind brushed his hair gently, and the view stretched out in quiet majesty. Small houses, tiny roads, trees bending in the morning breeze. Everything looked smaller from up here, like the problems of the world had been folded into paper and tucked away. In his hand again was the notebook, open to a new page. "There's something different about her," he wrote. "She doesn't just show kindness. She breathes it. It lives in her bones. She's not trying to prove anything. She's just real." Keanu had spent most of his life surrounded by noise, people shouting his name, flashes from cameras, interviews full of hollow questions, and over time he had learned to smile politely while slowly building a wall inside. But with Lily, that wall had cracked just enough for light to get through. He remembered how she had looked at him, not like a fan, not like someone trying to impress or flatter, but like she saw a human being. And that more than anything had shaken him. He hadn't meant to see her again. His plan had been to move on quietly like he always did. One town to the next, one test after another. But something about her kept pulling him back. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. That afternoon he went back to the coffee shop, not in disguise, not with a plan. He just wanted to sit, to think, maybe to hope. To his surprise, she was there, sitting by the window, reading a book with a soft smile on her face like she was at peace with the world. She looked up and saw him, and for the first time, he smiled first. "Funny running into you again," she said, closing her book. "Maybe not that funny," he replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you following me?" He chuckled. "Maybe I'm just following kindness." She laughed quietly, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Then sit. The world could use more followers like that." He sat down, and for a while they just talked. Not about big things, not about fame or loss or pain. They talked about music, about favorite childhood cartoons, about what it meant to feel like you didn't fit in, even when surrounded by people. They talked about how some people loved loud cities while others found comfort in silence. They shared stories of late-night snacks and awkward teenage memories. It was simple, it was human, and it was everything Keanu didn't know he needed. But as they spoke, Lily noticed something. Every time he smiled, there was a flicker behind his eyes, like a shadow he couldn't shake, like someone who knew too much about grief. So, when the laughter faded and the conversation slowed, she asked the question gently. "Who are you really?" Keanu paused. The cafe buzzed quietly around them, the sound of steaming milk, the clink of mugs, the shuffle of feet. But between them, there was only stillness. "I'm someone who lost too many people," he said finally. "And I guess I've been walking ever since," and she didn't ask for names, didn't pry, just nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. "Loss changes everything." "Yeah," he replied. "But sometimes it shows you who you are." And then she told him her truth, about the foster homes, the months on the street, the old man who once gave her a sandwich when she hadn't eaten in 3 days, the stranger who bought her a coat in winter without asking her name. "Kindness saved me," she said. "So now I give it back whenever I can." Keanu was quiet, deeply quiet. The kind of silence that only happens when someone is listening with their whole soul. "You know," he whispered, "that might be the most important thing anyone's ever said to me." Lily smiled gently. "Then I'm glad you were listening." The rain began again, soft and steady, and in that moment, 2 lives that had once been drifting on different oceans found the same shore. The truth beneath the hoodie, the next morning, unfolded like a whisper. No alarm, no rush, just sunlight slipping gently between the slats of Lily's window blinds. It warmed her walls and spilled across her small bookshelf, where worn paperbacks leaned on each other like old friends. But the warmth outside didn't match the tightness blooming inside her chest. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, staring at the same line in her open notebook for nearly 20 minutes. She was supposed to be writing a thank you letter to a nurse mentor from her past, but her thoughts refused to stay still. They circled around only one thing: him. The man with the quiet voice, the careful gaze, the weight in his posture that seemed older than his body. Every moment they had spent together over the last 2 days had begun to echo louder in her memory, like raindrops against a tin roof. Something about him wasn't adding up. He was too composed, too thoughtful, too familiar, and she wasn't imagining it anymore. She finally opened her laptop. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed a few keywords into the search bar. She didn't even know what she was looking for at first. She didn't want to invade his privacy, but something inside her, it wasn't curiosity, it was intuition, was begging for clarity. The screen loaded, and then it hit her like a wave crashing into glass. There he was. Not in a hoodie, not in shadows, but in full light. Keanu Reeves, movies, interviews, red carpets, charities, fans swarming him. His smile, the one he gave to the world, was the same smile he had given her across that coffee shop table. But the eyes were the giveaway. She knew those eyes now. Their kindness wasn't new. It was ancient, bruised, and still beautiful. She closed the laptop softly, her heart racing. It wasn't anger she felt, it was awe and confusion, and a strange sadness she couldn't explain. Why had he hidden himself? Why her? Why now? Meanwhile, Keanu sat alone in the motel again. The notebook was open in front of him, but he hadn't written a single word today. He was staring at the blank page as if daring it to speak first. But the only voice he heard was her voice echoing in his mind. Kindness saved me. So now I give it back whenever I can. Those words had shaken something loose in him. All his life, he had been looking for meaning through motion. Acting, traveling, escaping, surviving. But she had found it in stillness, in moments, in small, almost invisible acts that changed people without them realizing it. He had come to this town looking to test the world. But maybe, just maybe, he had been the one being tested all along. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He froze. No one knew he was here. He hadn't told anyone. Not his manager. Not his driver. Not even his sister. He opened the door slowly, and there she stood. Lily. No umbrella. No makeup. No pretense. Just her. Raw and steady as the wind. For a second, they just looked at each other. No words, no mask, just silence. Then she held up her phone. I know who you are, she said, her voice trembling. I figured it out this morning. He nodded, didn't deny it, didn't flinch. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. He looked down, then back up, his eyes gentle. Because I wanted to know who people really were. Without the spotlight, without the name. I needed to see if kindness still existed without a reward waiting behind it. She stepped inside slowly. He didn't stop her. He closed the door behind them, and they sat at the small table in the corner of the room. And did you find it? She asked softly. He looked at her for a long time. I did, he whispered. In you. Those words cracked something open in her, not because they were romantic, but because they were true. She leaned forward. So what now? He smiled. Not the one from posters or premieres. A real smile? I don't know. Maybe I stop running. Maybe I try to live like you do, one moment at a time. She nodded. Moments are powerful. Yeah, he said. They're everything. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped gift. It wasn't expensive. Just a book. One of her favorites. Poetry. The same one she had been reading at the bookstore. This helped me once, she said, placing it on the table between them. Maybe it'll help you too. He touched the book gently, as if it were something sacred. Thanks. You. They sat in silence again. No pressure to speak. Just a soft understanding hanging in the air. Outside, the sky was starting to clear. The clouds were parting slowly, revealing gentle shafts of golden light. And in that quiet motel room, two people who had once been strangers began to realize that maybe they weren't strangers at all. They were just two versions of the same story. Written by life, rewritten by kindness. The ripple effect, the days that followed passed like pages in a forgotten book, softly, slowly, without the weight of time pressing too hard. Lily had returned to her routines, walking to work with a warm drink in hand, checking in on her patients, listening to their stories like every word was a thread in a tapestry. But everything felt different now. Not louder, not brighter. Just clearer. Like someone had wiped the fog off a window and let her finally see through to the other side. She hadn't told anyone about him. Not her co-workers. Not her few friends. Not even Mrs. Merrick at the bookstore. Some stories were too sacred to share before they fully unfolded. And this wasn't just a story. This was something that had grown between two souls in silence, in shadow without needing the world's permission. Keanu stayed in town longer than he intended, not because of the cafes or the views or the peace, though those helped, but because of her. Not in a fairy tale way. There were no candle-lit declarations or dramatic kisses in the rain. Their connection was something else. Slower, stronger. It didn't ask for anything. It just was. Like roots of trees growing beneath the surface, quietly intertwining. They met often now, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the bookstore. Once, she invited him to the nursing home to meet a patient who kept asking for someone with a movie star smile. He had gone, not as a celebrity, but as a man with a gentle laugh and time to give. The old woman had lit up at his presence, unaware of who he really was, and Keanu had held her hand like it was the most important moment of his day. Because it was. Lily watched him closely over those visits, watched how he spoke to people with his full attention, how he listened like their words were gold, how he laughed not from his throat but from deep within. She began to understand that his fame was the least interesting thing about him, but she also knew he couldn't stay forever. One evening, just as the sun began to sink into the hills like a golden coin slipping into velvet, they walked together down a quiet path behind the town's old church. The trees whispered above them and the gravel crunched softly underfoot. "I'm leaving soon," he said gently. She didn't answer right away. She had known this moment would come. Even so, her chest tightened. "Where to?" she asked. He shrugged. "I don't know yet, but there are more places, more people, more kindness to look for." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You already found it." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Maybe. But what if it's not just about finding it? What if it's about spreading it, reminding people it still exists?" Lily smiled sadly. "You sound like someone trying to fix the world." "I'm just trying to believe in it again," he whispered. They stood in silence for a while, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because sometimes silence says everything. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Open this later," she said. "When you're far away." He took it with both hands. "What is it?" "You'll see." 2 days later, Keanu checked out of the motel. No press ever found him. No fan photos leaked online. Just like he'd come, he disappeared. But something lingered in that town. Something invisible, but powerful. People began to pay for strangers' coffees. Someone left a basket of groceries on a struggling family's porch. A teenager was seen helping an old man with his bags, not for tips, but because he could. Kindness had started to ripple through the streets like a quiet song. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, sitting on a train heading toward a new town, Keanu opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in Lily's careful script. "Dear you, I never cared about who you were on the outside. Not the name, not the roles, not the red carpets. I saw you for who you were when you thought no one would see. That's the only version of you that matters. And here's the truth. Kindness isn't something to chase, it's something to live. And you already do. I don't know where life will take you, but I hope you remember this. You don't have to be alone to be real. Sometimes real people need real people too, and if you ever come back, I'll be waiting. Not with questions, not with expectations. Just with tea, stories, and the same old kindness. Always. Lily." He read the letter twice, then a third time, and for the first time in a long, long while, Keanu Reeves let the tears fall, not from grief, not from loss, but from knowing at last that the world still held good people. And one of them, just a nurse in a small, forgotten town, had reminded him that kindness didn't need a camera or applause or reward. It only needed a willing heart, and someone one morning brave enough to pay for a stranger's coffee.